Have you ever been attacked by somebody that just seems to have it out for you? You don't know why, they just have it out for you. And they seem to be trying to tear you apart with as many people as possible, whether it's on social media, whether it's with all your friends, whether it's with all of their friends, whether it's everybody through the church, whatever it may be. They're just trying to ruin your reputation, it seems. Doing everything they can to do that. But you know that you're not guilty of doing anything wrong. You're not guilty of the thing that they're spreading these rumors about you. And if you could explain, most people would probably agree with you. They'd probably stand up for you. You'd probably could really get back at that person, and most others would cheer you on. If you went through something similar to that, what did you do? There's a couple of responses that are possible in this kind of scenario. A couple of ways you could respond. Response number one is you immediately stand up for yourself. You snap back some super smart line that you're really proud of in the moment. You really get back at them and put them in their place. Maybe you went on a mission to explain to as many people as possible that what this person was saying or these people were saying about you was not the right thing. That you did nothing wrong and how that other person is just an idiot. Maybe you just got so frustrated with the person or the situation that you just lost it. In possibly a completely justified manner. I'm not talking about just like losing it, but you just lost it on them. That's response number one, where you fight for yourself. Response number two, you could say something. You have the words. You have the right, even, to say something, to speak up, but you don't. Not because you're weak, not because you're scared, not because you don't want to stand up, but because deep down you're learning to trust that God sees, that God knows what's going on, that God has a solution, that He will stand up for you in ways that you couldn't possibly imagine or see. Which response did you choose? Which one is easier? I'd say for me, it's definitely the first one. That's in times where I've been through a similar situation, that's definitely one that I want to go with the first one. And there's a big tension between defending yourself and staying quiet, or staying quiet in a certain way. Now, of course, there are certain times and situations where it's appropriate to defend yourself. There are appropriate times for that. I'm not talking about those often life or death kind of situations, whether it's physical or some other kind, but I'm not talking about that kind of thing where you have to stand up for yourself. We've been going through Jesus' first big sermon. If you want to go back to Matthew chapter 5, if you're already there. This is the first sermon that we have recorded in the Bible, at least, from Jesus. Jesus is messing with their brains, flipping their everything they knew upside down. Everything that they thought they knew was completely opposite to what Jesus was teaching here. He starts out with, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," Matthew 5, verse 3. "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for the kingdom of heaven is theirs." And one of the big things that he was communicating with this is when you come to God fully realizing that you don't bring to Him anything, that you're spiritually bankrupt, that even the good things that you do have selfishness and in all the way through it. You are poor in spirit when you realize that, and you will be blessed because of it. When you come to God realizing that you are empty and can't bring anything. The kingdom of heaven, Jesus says, is for the people who are like this, not for the people who think they deserve it. Those who think they are rich in spirit, if you want to flip it around. The next one he said is, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." That again is very strange. Blessed or happy is another way to say this word in the Greek. Blessed or happy are those who mourn. Well, Jesus, one of the biggest things, this is something we talked about last week, one of the biggest things that this is talking about, when you are dealing with sadness and grief, of course, there is comfort that comes from Jesus. That is a big part of this, but that's not in the context of what he's talking about. That's not the biggest thing that Jesus is bringing out here, not the biggest point. Because those who are poor in spirit, when they realize that they have nothing to bring to God, when they realize how spiritually poor they are, they realize how different they are from the character of God. It's a gut-wrenching sorrow when you realize how short you are to the character of God. And when you reach that point, when you are mourning because of how deeply different you are from God and how much you want what God has for you, when you realize that, when you have that sorrow, that's when Jesus comes to comfort you. In the middle of your darkest time, he's the one that will lift you up. You realize when you're mourning, you come to God, you realize that he's not standing there with a checklist waiting to cross your name off the list. He's not waiting there with a checklist of all the things that you've done wrong. Those things are gone in his mind. He's there with love, open arms, running toward you. He was waiting for you. You will be comforted, Jesus says. The next thing that Jesus says is also something very counterintuitive to many people, and I think it overlaps really a lot with what Mary and Linda and Mike were talking about during the prayer time. There's a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about is exactly what they were talking about today. So let's continue on to this third statement that is just counterintuitive to what anybody would think logically. His third statement is blessed, this is in verse 5, blessed are the meek or humble, for they will inherit the earth. Jesus is still turning things upside down. Everyone in the audience probably thought that those who are going to inherit the earth are the strong, the ones who are going to overcome the enemies, the ones who are going to take over through strength. That's what they've been taught. That's what they were told would happen with the Romans, at least. But Jesus says the exact opposite. In a world that honors the loudest people, the best fighters, the winners, in a world that honors those people, Jesus honors those who quietly trust God to act. The meek. It's the kind of faith that doesn't rush to fix everything. It's the kind of faith that quiet confidence that waits for God to act. And this life, Jesus says, is a life that is truly blessed. Meekness is the courage to trust God instead of trying to control outcomes. When you trust God instead of trying to control how everything turns out in the end, he'll stand up for you in a way that you need it, even though it's not necessarily the way that you want him to stand up for you. It will be always in the way that you need him to stand up for you. Let God stand up for you. It works better every single time. So what exactly is Jesus blessing? He calls the meek or humble blessed. This word that's in this passage in Matthew 5, verse 5, is the Greek word praus, the word that's translated as meek. Most versions translate it in where it's used in the New Testament as meek, gentle, or humble. This word is only used 4 times in the New Testament. Meek just doesn't sound like something that I want to be. Sounds like something that I'm just letting people run over me. It sounds like somebody that is meek. If I'm meek, then I'm insecure or soft or unable to stand up for myself. I'm just letting things happen as they will. Whatever happens to me, happens to me. It sounds like there's not standing up for yourself at all. But this isn't what Jesus means when this word is used. In the Greek language, the word praus means to be gentle, to be calm, soothing, or tame. Especially in the context of an animal who has been tamed, a well-trained animal. It also carries the idea when it's talking about people, which is the context that it's used in the New Testament, it carries the idea of not being overly impressed with who you are, with yourself. So in other words, praus is used to describe someone who doesn't throw their weight around. They're calm, they're tame, in other words. They don't push for their own way, even if they have the right to or the strength to do so. They don't do it. They're gentle. They're calm. Meekness is when you say, I don't have to control everything. I don't have to prove to anyone. I don't have to prove to God. I don't have to even prove to myself. I don't have to prove myself. I trust God to handle what I can't. And this character trait especially shows up when someone challenges you or criticizes you or tries to humiliate you or overlooks you. And instead of fighting back, pushing back, you don't respond with that pride. You don't respond with that hurt or that anger. Meekness is not weakness. It's the complete opposite. It is a strength that is clearly seen through restraint. That's weakness. Meekness is a strength that is clearly seen through restraint. Most of the time, this word and words that are based on the same root word as praus, they're used in the New Testament to describe gentle, calm relationships between individuals, between different people. Now, you cannot be meek without having humility. The idea of humility doesn't quite capture the idea of meekness. They're separate things. They're related, of course, but they're not the same, even though in Bible translations they'll sometimes be used interchangeably. The word, in the Greek word that's usually translated as humility, is tapeinos. It's a completely different word. And in the New Testament, tapeinos means lowly or of low position. What did praus mean? You remember? Meek, but gentle, calm, tame, soothing. And tapeinos, which is usually the one that's translated more often as humility, means lowly or of low position. Humble is another, you could think of it that way too. At first glance, this sounds like somebody who is insignificant. Somebody who is not, who's being overlooked, somebody who's lesser than, they're lower than anybody else. But in the Bible, humility is not about thinking about how worthless you are. It's easy to think about that way. I'm just a worm. I'm worthless. I don't have anybody. Everybody is better than me. That's not biblical humility. Biblical humility is seeing yourself for who you are in relation to God, who you are before God, but you realize that everything you have is a gift from God. Everything that you have is, you can't do anything at all without God. So everything good that's inside of you anyway is from God in the first place. So you can't think less of something that God created, something that God put inside of you. You can't push yourself and feel worthless in a biblical humility. Humility is more about seeing yourself in a true light in contrast to God. Now, too many of the people in the crowd that day, to many of them, humility was not a good thing. It was condescending. Can you imagine being humble to one of the Roman soldiers, showing them humility? Absolutely not. They were a proud people. They would never think of doing that. It was condescending. But humility for a Christian implies submission to God. That's the idea of humility. Humility is not thinking of yourself less. Is not, I've got that flipped around. Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. I'll try that one more time. Humility is not thinking less of yourself, in other words, the worthlessness of who you are, but is thinking of yourself less. Because everything good that you have in you comes from God. So why would you think about yourself? If everything good comes from God, then you should be thinking of God who gave all of that to you. You should be thinking of others to use what God gave to you. Generally speaking, this isn't a hard and fast rule talking about the Greek words. But generally speaking, humility is a vertical thing, something that you experience between you and God. It's a change in who you are, in your realization of your place before God. And when you realize that you don't need to defend anything because everything came from God in the first place, when you realize you don't need to demand anything, you have no right or position to demand anything because you don't deserve anything to start with, then you start to have humility with God, and that then overflows horizontally, and you start seeing meekness in your calm, gentle relationships with those around you. Your humility with God, when you realize who you are in relation to God, changes how you view what other people do to you. Jesus modeled both meekness and humility. If you go to Matthew 11, just roll over a couple of pages here. Matthew 11, verse 29. And I'll start back in verse 28. Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened. It's a beautiful promise here. I will give you rest. Take my yoke and learn from me, because I am lowly, praus. And these words are kind of interchangeable the way they're used in the translations, but they have different meanings in the Greek, because I am lowly, praus, and humble, tapeinos, in heart, and you will find rest for your soul. Jesus sets that same example of having that humility and that meekness. Meekness holds back, not out of fear, not because of not feeling or having that strength, but because of your faith in God and because of your humility before God. Faith that knows that God sees everything way better than you could even imagine, way better than you could understand it. So you don't need to elevate yourself or defend yourself from a position of frustration and anger. You trust God enough to let Him stand up for you in His time. And that time doesn't often align with our time. But you trust Him to stand up for you when you need it. This is the kind of person that Jesus says is blessed. Not the loudest voice, not the strongest personality, not the person who thinks that they always have to have the last word, but the one who trusts enough to stay gentle and calm even when everybody around you is going crazy, even when it's the hardest. In the Old Testament, if you want to turn to Numbers chapter 12 with me, we read about a man who, even though he definitely wasn't perfect, God had developed meekness and humility in him. He had allowed God to work in his life. And in Numbers 12, verse 3, the Bible says Moses was a very humble man, more so than anyone on the face of the earth. No one was more humble than Moses. Now, some versions use the word meek instead of humble. Those are different words in Hebrew, of course, but it's the same connection of meekness. They're very similar. Moses wasn't naturally humble or meek. Remember the beginning of his story? If you go back into Exodus chapter 2, you can read all about his story. He was a Hebrew slave baby who was raised by Pharaoh's daughter, who rescued him out of the Nile. And as he grew older, he realized that his people were being cruelly oppressed, that he was a Hebrew, not an Egyptian. His people were being cruelly oppressed in slavery. One day when he was older, he saw an Egyptian beating up one of his people. And he impulsively took matters into his own hands and killed the Egyptian out of anger, to try to take control of the situation on his own, trying to change the outcome for his people. He thought he was strong enough that he could lead his people in strength out of Egypt. He was bold and passionate. He was the kind of guy that, using the words that Jesus did in Matthew 5, he was the kind of guy that you would think would inherit the earth. He was strong. God had plans for him. But Moses was not anywhere near ready yet. He didn't have humility or the resulting meekness that he needed for God to actually be able to work through him. If something happened, if he was able to do something at this point, in his mind, it was because of his great leadership ability and his strength. God couldn't have that. That wasn't healthy. That wasn't actually successful. That would never work in the long run. Moses had to run for his life into the desert. He goes from thinking that the people are going to follow him out of Egypt to running for his life away from his family, Pharaoh's family, his adopted family. For 40 years, God worked on him as he was shepherding flocks of sheep. Quite the downgrade from being the grandson to the Pharaoh. Big downgrade. But God used that time, and he learned to be humble. He learned to be meek, gentle, calm, tame. He was no longer that ambitious person who was trying to fight his way to the top. He was a completely different person now. By the time we get to Numbers chapter 12, Moses had been through decades of character development. At first, by himself, alone with flocks of sheep, and then as he was leading Israel out of Egypt. You know, Moses' brother and sister, this is the context of what we're reading in Numbers 12. His brother and sister Aaron and Miriam had become jealous of Moses' responsibility. They were jealous of how God was using Moses. And they publicly challenged him, but they got really dirty about it. They got super dirty about it. And if you go back to the couple verses before, Numbers 12, verse 1, it says, Miriam and Aaron criticized Moses because of the Cushite woman he married. For he had married a Cushite woman. They said, does the Lord speak only through Moses? Does he not also speak through us? And the Lord heard it. That's the key. The Lord heard it. They attacked his wife, the race of his wife. They attacked his leadership. They attacked his ability to hear the voice of God. They attacked his decisions. It was a deeply cutting personal attack on his family, on his wife, on his God. Everything they were attacking in those few sentences that they said. Now, Moses could have defended himself. He could have corrected them. You might even be able to make a case that Moses had a right and even a duty to stand up for his wife, at least for his wife and for his God, right? Most people would think he was a coward if he didn't. But he doesn't. The very next verse says, Moses was a very humble man, more so than anyone on the face of the earth. This was his response to their attack. He knew. The Lord heard it. He was surrendered to God. He trusted God fully to take care of this situation. He was even God's appointed leader over Israel. He could have kicked Aaron and Miriam out of the camp, and everybody, probably most of them, a lot of them, would have supported him in that. He didn't do anything. Well, he didn't do nothing, but he didn't do what most people would expect him to. He trusted God. And what happens? Remember, God heard it. God stepped in. Faster and better than Moses could ever have done, he calls Miriam and Aaron out and makes it clear that they are in the wrong. That Moses has been faithful to him. And not only that, God explains how unique and close of a relationship he has with Moses. Not most prophets, God says, I talk to them in a dream or a vision. I have to use symbols. I have to use something else to talk to them. But not with Moses. I talk to him basically as a friend. I openly and directly talk to Moses. And in fact, he's actually seen me. It's not very many people that can say that. I have a close relationship with Moses. And God disciplined Miriam and Aaron in a very public manner. Moses didn't have to defend himself. He didn't even have to stick up for his wife. He didn't have to stick up for God. Moses was not a passive leader, far from it. If you read through the stories of of him. He was definitely not a passive leader who just stood back and let things go, whatever happened. He was a bold leader who interceded passionately for his people with God. He would fight for them with God. There was multiple times where God would say, he was done with Israel, and Moses would intercede for them. God, please, no, this is, he stands up for his people. He confronts the rebellion head on many times, and believe me, Israel had a lot of rebellion. Again and again and again and again and again. And Moses kept patiently, gently working with them, fighting for them, helping them, mentoring them. He could only be this strong of a leader, though, because he was surrendered, because he had given himself to God, because he trusted God to be his defender. He didn't rush to protect his position or to grasp for his control of that he felt that he might be losing, because he knew that God had given him that position. He hadn't fought for that position. He knew God had given it to him. He knew that he hadn't done anything to get it. And in fact, it was quite the opposite. Moses did not want the position he had for quite a while. He fought God verbally for quite some time. He did not want it, but he became willing, and God was able to use him. It wasn't a position that he had climbed the rung fighting tooth and nail to get to. He knew that God had given it to him, and so how would he fight for it? He was meek and humble, not because he lacked the strength or the courage to deal with it or to confront it, but because he'd learned to surrender his strength. That was what made Moses such an amazing leader. He wasn't perfect. He made mistakes, but he was surrendered, allowing God to use him. Moses shows us that meekness is not weakness. It's a quiet strength that comes from knowing that you don't have to fight to defend yourself, that you don't have to fight to defend your reputation or your position or anything else around you, because you know that God gave you all of those things in the first place. And if he gave them to you, he's going to stand up for those things too. God knows how to stand up for you better than you do yourself. Now, Jesus was likely thinking of Psalm 37, verse 11, but if you can turn to Psalm 37, please. In Psalm 37, verse 11, we're going to be reading a chunk of this. But in verse 11, David writes, "But the humble will inherit the land and will enjoy abundant prosperity." Let's go through some of those verses just before that. We're going to read through the 10 verses before this. These are identifiers. Listen carefully for good identifiers of who meek and humble people are and how their reaction is to things that go on around them. Psalm 37, verse 1. "Do not be agitated by evildoers. Do not envy those who do wrong. For they wither quickly like grass and wilt like tender green plants." In other words, don't worry about people that are doing the bad things around you. Don't even spend time worrying about them. Don't spend time focusing on them. They're going to disappear anyway. Trust in the Lord and do what is good. Dwell in the land and live securely. Take delight in the Lord, and he will give you your heart's desires. Commit your way to the Lord. Notice all these verbs. Commit your way to the Lord. Trust in him, and he will act, making your righteousness shine like the dawn, your justice like the noonday. Be silent before the Lord and wait expectantly for him. Do not be agitated by the one who prospers in his way, by the person who carries out evil plans. Refrain from anger and give up your rage. Do not be agitated, for it can only bring harm. For evildoers will be destroyed, but those who put their hope in the Lord will inherit the land. a little while, the wicked person will be no more. Though you look for him, he will not be there. But the humble will inherit the land and will enjoy abundant prosperity. Do you notice all of these verbs again? Trust in the Lord. Take delight in the Lord. He will give you your heart's desires. Commit your way. Be silent to the Lord. Refrain from anger. Trust in him. He will act. Wait expectantly before him. And again, this repeated in between all of these things about waiting on God is don't let all the things that are going on bad around you distract you from what you need to be doing, which is putting your way, trusting your way to God. Don't fight all of those things because God's going to stand up for himself. God's going to stand up for you when you need it. The meek are those who don't panic and fight back. The meek are those who wait on God, who trust in him, even when the wicked are doing terrible things. In the end, the meek will enjoy abundant prosperity, and not because they fought for it, not because they struggled for it, but because they trust God to work everything out. Jesus sets us this example really well in 1 Peter 2, verse 23. When he was insulted, he did not insult in return. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. Have you entrusted yourself to the one who judges justly? What that means is not really caring about any other insults or anything that people are throwing at you, because you're entrusting yourself to the one who's going to judge justly, who's going to stand up for you better than you could possibly do so now. This is true meekness. People who come to this point of surrender are who Jesus says is blessed. Jesus chose to not respond to every insult. Jesus stood before Pilate getting beaten, getting slapped, getting a crown of thorns pressed on his head, getting mistreated, getting tossed around between. He could have stood up for himself. He had the power. He even had the right to do so. They were mistreating him. He had done nothing wrong. He didn't stand up for himself. He didn't return insult for insult. He even let himself be killed for accusation that he hadn't done, something he hadn't said. Why? Because he was thinking of others. He was thinking of you. And even more so, because he trusted his Father. He knew that his Father would stand up for him. He's standing up for you. In meekness and humility, he stood up for you. Not in a show of strength, but not in force. But he stood up for you by laying down his life, surrendering completely for you. The meek will indeed inherit the earth. Let God stand up for you. Now, I'll be the first to admit this is really hard. It's really hard. It's hard to not do anything when your reputation is being slaughtered by someone or by a group of people, whatever it is, especially if it's someone that's close to you, especially if it's family or someone that you thought was a friend. It's hard to step back. Surrender is the hardest thing you will ever do. You'd think that fighting would be the hardest thing, but no, it's not. That's our gut response usually in most of these situations. Now, this doesn't mean that God is telling us to let people run all over you. Just be a stomping ground for whoever wants to run over you. That's not what God is telling you here. It means to first remember in humility, remember who you are in relation to God and how amazing and great God is, how deeply he loves you. Remember that first. It means that before you do anything, that you completely surrender to God. You let him guide the outcome of whatever is happening. You don't try to control the outcome on your own. It never works out well. Sometimes he will lead you to say something or to do something. Sometimes. But other times, he'll lead you to do nothing. Stand back and it's seemingly let people stomp all over you. Sometimes he'll lead you to do that, to be quiet. But the outcome will be better every time. Instead of trying to stand up for yourself without him, to let him stand up for you. Remember, everything good in your life came from God in the first place. It's not yours to hang on to. It's not yours to stand up for. God gave it to you. He will stand up for you. So let God stand up for you. The cross provides, it proves that God will stand up for his people. It also shows us how he stands up for his people, but it's the best example of strength through surrender. And the question is, will you step back and let him stand up for you? In your relationships with others, will you start trusting God to stand up for your character and your reputation? Let God stand up for you. In your ministry to others, will you stop trying to control the outcome of trying to bring conviction or trying to bring people across the finish line in their decision to follow Jesus? Something that you can't do. Let God stand up for you. When you look all around and you see people who are doing things that go against everything that you know to be true, and you want to stand up for the church or to stand up for other organizations or people, or you want to fight for them, but they're not your church, it's not your organization. Let God stand up for you. In your own mind, that pressure that you think that you're the only one that will stand up for yourself, you've probably been taught growing up, who's going to stand up for you if you don't stand up for yourself? Well, there's one who will. Let God stand up for you. If you do this, you're not insecure, you're not weak, you're surrendered. And that's where God can use you. That's where God can bless you. When you realize that you don't have to stand up for yourself all the time, you start to see how often God stands up for you. You've just been stepping in front of him and getting in the way where you don't really see him do things for you because you've been trying so hard to do it for yourself. The world often honors the loudest and the strongest, the ones who stand up for themselves, the ones who push over and through other people to get to the top. That's who the world honors. But Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth."